The church bells rang, and I swear I felt them vibrating in my chest. Standing at the altar in my white gown, I could almost feel the light itself wrapping around me. My hands shook, but Daniel's grip was firm, steady, like an anchor I desperately needed in that moment. The priest's words floated above us, soft yet powerful, sealing us into something I thought was unbreakable. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world had gone still, like everything I'd ever dreamed of had finally landed right in my hands. This, I told myself, is forever. The moment the priest declared us husband and wife, the church erupted. The sound of applause hit me like a wave, and I let it carry me out into the sunlight. Petals fluttered through the air, cheers rose all around us, and my heart felt impossibly full. The warmth of the day pressed against my skin. The smell of roses and lilies was everywhere, and I couldn't stop smiling. Cameras clicked, catching pieces of my joy, the veil trailing behind me like a ribbon of light. If happiness had a texture, I swear I was wrapped in it. I turned to Daniel, my voice barely more than a whisper, though every ounce of me meant it. We made it. This is our forever. He leaned close, his lips brushing my ear, his tone so certain it melted something inside me. Nothing could ever ruin this day. And in that instant, I believed him. I wanted to hold on to that promise, let it sink into every corner of my soul. But even as I smiled, there was a faint tremor inside me, a flicker of unease I couldn't quite name. Stepping out of the church felt like stepping into a dream I never wanted to end. The sun poured down on us, warm and golden, as if the universe itself was blessing our vows. Guests lined the pathway, clapping, tossing petals, their voices rising in cheers that made me laugh through tears. I caught sight of my mother's face in the crowd. Her eyes glistened, proud and relieved, and it made my heart swell even more. For a fleeting second, everything felt flawless, like life had finally given me the fairy tale ending I had longed for. Daniel squeezed my hand tighter as we walked together, the rhythm of our steps almost in sync with the beating of my heart. "You look incredible," he whispered, his smile wide and proud, like a man who had won the world. His words landed softly, but they meant everything. In his eyes, I thought I saw a promise, a lifetime of loyalty and devotion. That belief wrapped itself around me, making me float above all the noise, all the distractions. If this was the beginning, then how extraordinary would forever be? Children ran ahead of us, their laughter ringing out like bells, and I couldn't stop smiling. Every detail, the flowers, the sunlight, the people I loved, felt like it had been crafted just for me. I looked up at Daniel again, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the shine in his eyes, and the way his fingers held mine as if they'd never let go. I told myself to lock this moment deep inside, to guard it, because it was too precious to ever lose. Little did I know how fragile that perfect illusion really was. As we reached the steps outside, I felt like I was walking on air. My gown trailed behind me, catching the light, and the cheers around us rose higher, filling every corner of the street. Strangers smiled as they passed, and our guests leaned in with phones, capturing every second of what they thought was the happiest day of my life. For me, it truly felt like it. Every breath tasted sweet, every sound was music, and for the first time in years, I believed I had everything I'd ever prayed for. I leaned closer to Daniel, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "We made it," I whispered, almost afraid that saying it too loudly would break the magic. "This is our forever." His lips brushed my ear, his words steady and warm. Nothing could ever ruin this day. The way he said it, so certain, so unshakable, sent a rush of relief through me. I held on to his hand a little tighter, letting that sentence become a promise etched into the fabric of my soul. The crowd roared again, tossing handfuls of petals into the air, and I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it all wash over me. I told myself to remember every detail, the scent of the roses, the sound of applause, the way Daniel's hand wrapped around mine like it was carved to fit. I thought I was sealing this moment into memory, to carry with me forever. But somewhere, Deep in the background of all that joy, life was already preparing the storm that would crash through everything I held dear. Just as I was ready to breathe, to let the joy settle in, a voice cut through the air like glass shattering on stone. "This wedding is a lie!" The words slammed into me, sharp and impossible to ignore. I froze mid-step, my bouquet trembling in my hands as I turned toward the sound. And there she was, a woman in a striking red dress, her eyes blazing, her arm raised high. For one horrifying second, it felt like the earth tilted beneath me. The bouquet she held slipped from her grasp and hit the ground with a thud that echoed louder than the church bells ever had. Gasps rippled through the crowd, cameras snapped furiously, and I could feel the eyes of every guest drilling into me. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and my mind fought to make sense of what I was seeing. Daniel's hand stiffened in mine, his smile faltering. The moment that had felt so solid just seconds ago suddenly cracked wide open. The woman's voice didn't waver, not even under the weight of hundreds of stares. "He promised me the same vows last week," she shouted, her fury trembling at the edges of every syllable. My stomach twisted, my fingers clutched at my gown, and for a heartbeat, I couldn't move. The cheers turned into whispers, the applause into murmurs of disbelief. And there I stood, the bride in white, caught in the center of a scene I never imagined would belong to me. I turned to Daniel, my voice barely holding together, cracking under the weight of panic. "Daniel? Who is she?" The words stumbled out of me, desperate and trembling, but he didn't flinch. He forced a smile so tight it almost looked like a grimace, beads of sweat already forming on his forehead. "Nobody," he muttered quickly, shaking his head. "She's crazy. I don't even know her." But even as he spoke, the crowd stirred, sensing the lie in his tone. The woman in red didn't hesitate. With a calmness that chilled me to the bone, she reached into her purse and pulled out photographs. Cruel, undeniable proof. She held them up high, the glossy images catching the sunlight, each one a dagger to my heart. Pictures of Daniel with her, his arm around her waist, lips pressed against her cheek, smiles that once belonged to me alone. My hands shook as my bouquet slipped from my grip, petals scattering like tiny explosions at my feet. Gasps erupted, and I could hear whispers tearing through the crowd like wildfire. "Oh my God, is that him? On their wedding day?" The weight of 100 stares pressed down on me, suffocating, heavy with pity. My dress suddenly felt too tight, my skin too raw, my whole body frozen in disbelief. This wasn't happening, not here, not now. And yet the evidence was flashing in the sun for everyone to see, unraveling the fairy tale I had built around Daniel with one brutal swipe. My breath came in short, jagged bursts, as if the corset of my dress had suddenly tightened around me. I stared at those photos, each one louder than any denial Daniel could ever muster. My lips parted, my voice breaking as I tried to hold on to the last shred of hope. "Tell me this isn't true. Please, Daniel." The words came out like a plea, trembling, almost childlike, desperate for him to reach out and pull me back from the edge. But instead of comfort, I felt the sting of his anger. His face darkened, his jaw clenched, and his voice cut sharp through the air. "You're embarrassing us. This is our wedding day." The tone wasn't protective. It was defensive, panicked, cornered. I flinched, my heart pounding harder, and in that instant, I realized the man standing beside me wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to save himself, and that truth hollowed me out more than the betrayal itself. Tears streamed hot down my cheeks, blurring the faces of the guests staring at me with pity. My hands trembled as I pressed them against my gown, trying to steady myself, but the fabric felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Around me, the whispers grew louder, their judgment falling heavy on Daniel, not me. For the first time, I saw him not as the man I had just vowed forever to, but as the stranger who had just shattered it in front of the entire world. The world around me blurred into a haze of whispers and stares, as if the walls of the church courtyard were closing in. I could hear my aunts murmuring behind me, their voices a mix of pity and outrage, and the sting of it settled deep in my chest. My heart wasn't just broken. It felt pulverized, crushed into pieces so small I could hardly breathe through the ache. I looked at Daniel, my vision clouded with tears, and begged him one last time with nothing but my eyes to tell me it was all a lie. But the silence between us said more than words ever could. He refused to meet my gaze, his face twisted with frustration instead of remorse, and that choice burned hotter than fire. "No," I finally managed, my voice cracking but growing steadier with each syllable. "You embarrassed me when you invited her into our lives." The words tumbled out, shaking, but once they were in the air, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was anger clawing its way to the surface. Around us, the crowd shifted, their pity tilting, their disgust landing squarely on him. I caught snippets. How could he? On their wedding day. And though their sympathy was meant for me, it felt like a weight pressing me down. I wanted to vanish, to disappear from the eyes dissecting every second of my humiliation. But beneath the sorrow, something colder, sharper, began to grow. I inhaled deeply, the sob catching in my throat, and with that breath, I felt the spark of a new resolve flicker to life. Daniel's voice cut through the air again, harsher this time, as if volume could rewrite the truth. "You're making a scene," he hissed, his hand tightening around mine, not in comfort but in control. The force of it sent a chill crawling up my arm, and I yanked my hand free, staring at him as though he were a stranger I'd just met. The crowd leaned in, hanging on every word, every gesture, and I realized I wasn't just fighting for my dignity, I was fighting for the truth. My tears blurred the world, but my voice came clearer now, steadier than I thought possible. "You promised me forever, Daniel, and you gave it to her." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream could have been. He clenched his jaw, his eyes darting at the cameras, at the faces recording his downfall, and I knew then his shame wasn't about me. It was about being caught. That revelation, bitter and cold, snapped something deep inside me. A part of me still longed to collapse, to crumble into the arms of someone who could shield me from this wreckage, but no one stepped forward. Not family, not friends, not even him. I stood alone, trembling, but with each heartbeat, I felt a strange strength weaving through the cracks of my pain. It was raw. It was new. But it was mine. And for the first time since stepping into that white dress, I began to see a way forward that didn't include him at all. The whispers swelled again, a storm of judgment circling around us, but I no longer felt crushed beneath them. Instead, I let them fuel me, each word pushing me further from the woman who had walked down the aisle and closer to the woman who would walk away stronger. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand, leaving streaks across my face, and for once, I didn't care how I looked. Pity was no longer my burden to carry. It was his. I lifted my chin, catching Daniel's eyes at last. For the first time, I didn't see my husband, the man I had chosen, or the partner I thought I knew. I saw the liar, the coward, the man who had stood beside me at the altar while keeping someone else's lips still warm on his. And as the photos passed from hand to hand, burning his lies into everyone's memory, I realized I didn't need him to confess. The proof was there, and so was my clarity. Taking a deep breath, I let the crowd fade, their gasps and murmurs falling away until it was just me and my resolve. The heartbreak was still raw, the pain still sharp, but beneath it all, something steadier had taken root. I wasn't going to collapse in front of them. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me destroyed. My sorrow was hardening into steel, and in that quiet transformation, I knew this was only the beginning of a much colder plan. I left the celebration without a word, my heels clicking against the stone steps as though they were marking the rhythm of my resolve. Behind me, the chaos still raged, voices raised, cameras flashing, but I didn't turn back. Each step I took away from that church felt like peeling away a layer of the woman who had once believed Daniel's promises. By the time I reached the car, the veil slipping from my hair, I wasn't just a bride anymore. I was something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose. The ride home was silent, the kind of silence that settles heavy in your chest, pressing against every bone. My reflection in the car window startled me. Red eyes, trembling lips, but beneath it all, a calm I hadn't felt in years. Heartbreak still pulsed through me, but so did a new kind of clarity. As I stepped inside the quiet of my house, the scent of roses clinging to my gown, I knew exactly where to go. Straight to the drawer where the truth had been waiting for me all along. I pulled out the prenup, my fingers tracing the crisp edge of the paper, remembering the way Daniel had laughed when he signed it. Just a formality, he'd said back then, smiling, so sure he'd never betray me. My hands shook, but this time it wasn't from weakness, it was from anticipation. In bold letters, the clause glared back at me. No infidelity. And suddenly, the humiliation he thought would ruin me turned into the very weapon that would set me free. I sat at the kitchen table, the papers spread before me like a map of my escape. My fingertips pressed into the lines of his signature, the ink that tied him to his own undoing. For a moment, grief tried to claw its way back in, whispering that I had lost everything. But then I remembered her face, her voice cutting through my vows, and suddenly grief turned into fire. He thought he had humiliated me in front of everyone, but what he really did was hand me the keys to his downfall. With a steady breath, I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had memorized for years but never thought I'd use in this way. My lawyer answered, his voice calm and even, a strange contrast to the storm brewing inside me. "I have proof," I said firmly, sliding the photos across the table as if he could already see them. "I'm sending everything now. The prenup clause. He broke it." Saying it aloud felt like drawing a line through my past, separating the woman I had been from the woman I was becoming. Minutes later, his reply came back, quiet but certain. "Sophia, with this evidence, the entire estate becomes yours." He signed it himself. My throat tightened, but not with sadness. This was power settling into my chest. I pressed my palm against the papers, feeling their weight, their promise. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but this time, they weren't just for heartbreak. They were for victory, for survival, for the promise of a future that Daniel could never touch again. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the pile of evidence that had shifted the ground beneath me. The silence of the house felt different now, less like loneliness and more like preparation. Every detail of that day replayed in my mind. The gasp of the crowd, the smug look in Daniel's eyes as he tried to dismiss her, the pity that clung to me like a second veil. He believed he had destroyed me, but he had no idea that I was already building the end of his story. A laugh escaped me, soft at first, then louder, almost shocking in the stillness of the room. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing away the last traces of tears. "You wanted to make a fool out of me in front of everyone," I whispered to the empty air, my voice steady now. "But I'll be the one to end you." The words didn't feel like anger. They felt like truth. And for the first time since the ceremony, I felt in control. I closed the folder with a snap, my decision sealed as tightly as the ink on his signature. The prenup wasn't just paper anymore. It was my sword, my shield, my revenge carefully wrapped in legality. Daniel would never see it coming. While he thought I was broken, hiding away in shame, I was planning my strike in silence. And when it came, it would be swift, public, and absolute. A week later, the sound of his car pulling into the driveway made my stomach tighten, but not with nerves. This time, it was anticipation. I stood in the living room, divorce papers spread neatly on the table like a final act waiting for its curtain call. When Daniel walked in, his shoulders slumped, his tie loosened. He looked nothing like the man who had stood beside me at the altar. He looked smaller, desperate, as though the weight of his own lies had finally begun to crush him. "Sophia," he said, his voice heavy, almost pleading. "Let's just forget that scene. We can move on, start fresh." His words hung in the air, thick with arrogance disguised as hope. I studied him in silence for a moment, letting him believe he still had a chance to rewrite the ending. Inside me there was no hesitation. The part of me that once longed for his comfort was gone, replaced by a steel resolve I hadn't known I carried. Finally, I spoke, my voice cool enough to cut through the room. Move on? Oh, we will. Just not together. His eyes darted to the table then, to the sharp white edges of the documents waiting for his signature. I watched his face twist, the first flicker of panic breaking through his mask. In that moment, I didn't feel like the woman he betrayed. I felt like the woman who held every card in her hand. His hands shook as he reached for the papers, flipping them open with disbelief widening his eyes. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising, cracking under the pressure. Before I could answer, my lawyer, calm, composed, unshaken, spoke from the chair beside me. "By the prenup, due to infidelity, everything transfers to Sophia. The house, the accounts, everything." The words sliced through the room like a gavel striking down, final and absolute. Daniel's face turned red, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, slamming his fist against the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. For a second, I saw the man who once terrified me with his temper, but that fear no longer lived in me. I sat still, steady, watching him unravel like a thread pulled too far. This wasn't his stage anymore, it was mine, and every line of that document reminded him he had written his own downfall. I leaned forward, folding my hands together, my gaze never leaving his. "You're right," I said softly, each word deliberate, unshakable. "I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of his breath growing shallow, uneven. I let the words settle, sink in, wrapping around him tighter than any vow he'd ever broken. For the first time, I felt no sadness, no ache, only the sweet weight of justice pressing in. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for words that no longer existed. Rage and desperation flickered across his face, but none of it moved me. I reached down, picked up the bouquet of divorce papers, and slid them across the table toward him like an offering he couldn't refuse. "Consider this bouquet my parting gift," I said, my voice calm, steady, and merciless. His eyes widened, the weight of the symbolism hitting him as hard as the truth itself. Daniel shoved back from the table, pacing, his movements wild, chaotic, nothing like the man who once promised me forever. He shouted again, curses tangled with excuses, but I didn't flinch. Every word he threw at me bounced off the armor I had built out of betrayal and resolve. Watching him unravel wasn't painful. It was liberating. This was no longer my burden to carry. It was his, and I was finally free. When he stormed out, the door slamming behind him, the silence that followed felt like the first true breath I'd taken in years. I stood there, tall, unbroken, the papers now mine, the house mine, the future mine. For so long, I thought I needed him to complete my story, but standing in that room, I realized something far greater. I had rewritten the ending myself, and this time, it was on my terms.